All right. So today we're looking at one of the topical, issues in communication, especially in political communication, and it has a lot to do with media, and then of course journalism and PR and so many other communication forms that we can think about. Can you see the slides, please?
Yes, Doc, we can. I can see.
Yes,
Okay,
yes, we can
Yes,
see.
yes,
Yes.
we can see it clear.
excellent. Thank you. And I think that today's session, you don't want to miss it because it's one of the most uh, one of the areas that I like so much because I think as a communication theorist or as a communication professional or a media person, you have to have a very sophisticated, mindset or a very sophisticated, viewpoints or worldview that could make you see through how communicators or politicians actually manipulate, the citizenry, in order that you will be able to, understand it, and of course, devise mechanisms to actually fight it if you're in the position of fighting that, or if you become a politician, how can you actually use that to your advantage? Of course, that is the reality. Uh, of course, we would always insist that the best practice or ethical conduct is the first thing that you want to appreciate yourself with, in order that you do not become manipulative of the people. But we still have to understand it, whether you use it in a better way or you use it negatively, that is to your professional conduct. I mean, I would want to play in a very ethical manner, but some people would also want to do otherwise. Of course, it's difficult to sanction. As academics, we only can teach you, and then how you apply it is actually subject to you yourself and your conscience. Now, uh, manufacturing consent is one of the most popular topics in media, journalism, PR, political communication. And it is one of the things that perhaps sometimes, it is difficult to actually see through, if you do not have that background. And in this lecture, I think I'm going to make some very controversial pronouncements or some controversial expositions that some of you, depending on where you stand, may not be happy, but I think that is good for you to know. And I will cite some of these examples so that you could actually tell, the happenings and how you can actually, prepare yourself, towards it. Now, when you hear manufacturing consent, what comes to mind immediately? What comes to your mind when you hear manufacturing consent? Yeah, anyone? Yeah, I know it's a little bit a difficult one to think about, but yeah, when you hear manufacturing consent, what does manufacturing mean? Who can tell us what manufacturing mean? Break it down. What does manufacturing mean, or what does consent mean? Anyone? Julius, can you start with us?
Okay. So, Doc, I think to manufacture something basically means to create something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that is manufacturing means a deliberation of bringing something to being. All right. Okay.
Yes.
Who else
Yes.
wants to add on to it? Who else want to add? Tracy. Tracy, you're on mute, so unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm here.
Mhm.
It immediately brings to mind the concept of creation,
Yeah.
creating something.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yes.
And
And the consent,
yeah. Go on.
the consent brings to mind an action of agreeing to something
Excellent.
or giving
Excellent.
the nod.
So if
Yeah.
you have to add the two together, what does that mean, Tracy?
It would mean giving consent for something to be created or to be brought to, affirming for something to be brought to being.
Okay, that's fine. Who else want to add? We're talking about manufacturing consent.
And Doc, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So I would say that manufacturing consent means that coming up with ideologies or coming up with laws or things that the citizens or the people in the state will be willing to follow or will be willing to like agree on
Okay.
or something like that. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Gifty. All right. Is that Deborah? That was Deborah. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Gifty, come in. Unmute yourself.
No, this for communication.
Yeah. Gifty, unmute yourself.
If you know more than that, fine. Yeah, I don't know more than that. I'm not about to hear it.
Okay. Tracy, you have to be on mute. All right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Julius, your hand was up.
Yes, Doc. I think just as Deborah explained, I also basically think it's about you someone creating something that would be easily bought into by the people.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Gifty, you want to unmute yourself to say something? Because your hand is up. Gifty. All right. Gifty is not there. Okay. So basically, let's hear you.
So I was saying that it's seeking for the approval to create something or to manufacture something.
Okay, thank you. All right, so basically when you hear the word consent, obviously it's about seeking approval, all right? Approval of someone. Somebody, when we say you have to seek the consent of someone in some way, some negotiations, you mean that you have to let someone understand, and willingly say that, yes, I agree to this, in order that you could actually go ahead with whatever, agreement or whatever activity you have with that person. And we hear a lot about, especially when it comes to the debate about, sexual conduct. And it's one of the things that, in some time, there were quite a lot of, kind of talk about it. The idea that, especially when it comes to the affirmative action movement, the idea that even, men and their wives, there were some topical issue about men should seek consent from their wives in having an affair and etc. I mean, these are some of the popular, topics that we've actually heard the word consent used. Obviously, when it comes to, child labor, when it comes to labor, for example, we had heard the word consent, many times, where especially when the discussions of child labor came, most, African countries were, guilty of not, or applying their young ones to work without their consent, without, approval of a particular, authority or so. So the word consent had actually come in many conversations. Now, in political communication or in democracy, it is understood that, people must, willingly contribute to deliberations. And of course, we talk about persuasion, in political communication quite a lot. And the last time what we did, what we call public opinion, the understanding was that public opinion is not forced opinion. It is opinion that people willingly give out, as contributing to dialogue or contributing to, discourse within particular, jurisdiction. Now, so it is understood that people participating in democratic, conversations or democratic space actually do so willingly or do so from their own volition based on the understanding of the issues, their understanding of the issues, and therefore contributing to it. But according to Noam Chomsky and Edward, the idea that, people, willingly participate in democratic process, especially with the, introduction of mediatization, which you all understand what we call mediatization, or with the emergence of mediatization, it doesn't look as though the citizens are actually freely, contributing or freely engaging in public discourse, for example, or freely engaging in public opinion, for example. Why? Because they identify some kind of forces that actually, sort of manipulate the space that we call public opinion. In order that people would give approval to the discourse without necessarily, wanting to do so, which means that the kind of approval that we think that we're given willingly are actually not willingly, but they are manipulated. I don't know whether you can understand me from this position. All right. So we're saying that the approval that political class, the media actually seek, in our contribution to the democratic discourse is not necessarily free from, forces or free from, some kind of compulsion. It's actually there are some forces that are making us give that kind of approval without us seeing that we are being controlled by these forces. And that's why they call it manufacturing consent. It means that the media, the politicians, the powerful people manufacture our consent. They create our consent without us knowing that they are creating it. So we think that we are freely contributing, we are freely engaging in public discourse or public opinion, but it is not that free. Those opinions that we're sharing, those opinions that we're contributing, those approval that we're giving are actually forced approval, within the public space or within the public sphere. So we're going to look at some of these forces. How are they saying, or why are they saying that we're not willingly operating? Why are they saying that we're not willingly, contributing, but we are contributing because of some forces? We're going to see that, and I'm sure you guys would, come out with some examples for us to see whether indeed, the opinion that we're expressing are actually forced opinion, or we're willingly doing that. All right. So who can actually, with this kind of explanation that I've given, who can actually give an example of what you think are forces, controlling our discourse or our, public opinion or public sphere? Who can actually give an example from what I've just explained? Or do you understand what I've just explained? Yeah? Guys?
So no,
Yeah, hello, Doc.
so
Yeah.
not really.
Anastasia, you don't understand it. Okay, who understands what I just explained and can throw more light on it? Yeah, Evelyn. Unmute yourself and say.
So I want to ask a question
Hello.
first for clarification before she talks.
Okay. Anastasia.
Okay, so please, are you saying that? So this is what I understand, okay, from your lecture, that although citizens or publics are being given the platform to share their opinions about certain subject matter of the society, those opinions that they do share are sometimes forced. So is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we're saying that those opinions are not free from forces. We are actually compelled to give those opinions, or we're not actually, giving those from our own volition, but it's as a result of some kind of forces. That's why we're sharing those things. Are you with me?
Okay. Yeah, then it's okay.
So what we take as free opinions, what we take as something that is actually freely coming from us without being compelled, is actually not the case. Do you get that? Anas?
Yeah, I yes, please,
Okay.
I do know.
Okay. Yeah, Evelyn, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I wanted to throw more light on the fact that our consent are manufactured in the sense that mostly the continuous or the repetition of discussions on our media platforms actually inform us on the decision to make when it comes to political issues or issues pertaining the country. So probably that thing has happened, but you didn't really give your attention to it. But because of the continuous discussions that were being made on media platforms, then you begin to put your mind to it and begin to voice out your opinion. So for example, with Wyoming's case, like initially when it started, it wasn't something people were really following until it became an issue of public discussion. Like when you tune into every radio station, they are discussing Wyoming.
Yeah.
Then people decided to talk that, hey, he should bring the money, he should do this, he should do that. And even currently, looking at the election petition, a lot of people weren't following until some radio stations decided to devote their morning shows for that particular election petition. So they follow the election petition for that particular time allocated for their morning shows.
Excellent.
So people decided to follow it. And even the vetting of the ministers. Look at the funny statement people started giving out about this woman, a Ministry of Fishery and all that, meaning that people were following. The media manufactured that consent because they were pushing that agenda. Like they were continuously showing that program. That is what I understand by this particular.
So you realize that the intensity of the media on certain topics can, invariably bring some issues that otherwise may not have been an issue to play, and for public engagement. Now, so if you listen to the examples that, Evelyn just cited, in the past, I don't think that we were really into ministerial vetting until recently. And so you see a role that the media is playing in terms of agenda setting, in terms of intensity on certain topics. And all of a sudden, they become an issue. And people feel strongly that they must actually contribute, or they must actually seek some kind of demands from public officials, etc. So that's what we're talking about. We're saying that there are some manipulation that are in place in order to actually force citizenship to kind of give approval to some topics without necessarily realizing that we're being forced to do so. And that's what we're talking about. Before Gifty, Elikem, I think your hand was up.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I wanted to give an example on the election petition, but then I realized that Evelyn spoke on that. And also, I think the media is like the country's downfall, because there are issues that we need to talk about. There are some communities or environments which needs let's say water, electricity, schools, and all those things. But then the media is not touching the way they carry this election petition issue. They don't carry some issues of that sort. So I would say that the media is very biased when it comes to talking about issues.
Excellent. So editorial behaviors, editorial selection, all right, is one of those forces that we're going to look at that actually create consent. We as people think that we're actually discussing topics of importance, but little do we know that it is as a result of editorial choices. That's why we're discussing some of these issues. There are some issues that do not actually come into the public domain. Why? Because they are not the choices of the editors. And so you think that we are freely engaging in public discourse. We're not. We are being shaped and we're being created, or our opinions are being forced, to be created as a result of some actions or inactions of some institutions or some players in the system. And that's what we're talking about. Gifty, unmute.
Sir, please, I wanted to ask from this perspective, how about like going to the bank, when you want to maybe do a new investment or open an account, then they ask for your TIN number. Although it's a have it or not, but because they ask for it, you have no choice than to go. It can, like, from that perspective.
Excellent. So we're talking about every possible constraint that are actually introduced into the communication in order that you do something without even you realizing that you are doing it or you are agreeing to it as a result of those constraints is what we're actually discussing. So definitely that example would play out. Okay, Deborah. Deborah, on mute.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to give another example.
Mm-hmm.
That's the LGBTQ.
Excellent.
It was happening, but because the media wasn't like showing what was happening, nobody had any idea. Like nobody wanted to share their opinions on what was happening. But immediately the media houses started publishing stuff about the LGBTQ. People started voicing their opinions and then telling, so that's
yeah, you're right. Yeah. And even the other side of the story. All right. So you ask yourself, why is it that it's only one side of the story that we're hearing? Why is it that we're not hearing the other side of the story when it comes to the LGBT conversation? It is because the media has decided and the society has decided to stay on the other side because of certain constraints. And that's what we're discussing now. Julius.
Right, Doc, thank you. Doc, from the explanations that you've given, can we equate manufacturing consent to agenda setting?
Of course, these are tools, agenda setting and all those things, propaganda. In fact, they talk about the propaganda model, which we're going to look at. So definitely in manufacturing consent, the tools that you use are the propaganda tools. And that's what we're going to actually look at. Are you with me? So certainly right. we can talk about that. So what I'm trying to say is that usually we think that for us to see propaganda, that we must see some kind of introduction of words, all right? And then for us to determine that this is propaganda. But in most cases, the most powerful propaganda do not come in words. In fact, they come in words that are actually meant opposite. So some people may use the word democracy, but in actual fact, what they're doing is the opposite of it. And even some people have actually argued that democracy itself is not exactly what it intends, in doing. So we're going to look at the critical or the most, tricky part of political communication that we may not necessarily see it as manipulating, but they are in nature, all right? And that's what we're actually talking about. So we have to have that critical mindset of evaluating when and how people manipulate the society in order that we could actually guard against it or otherwise. So the overview says to understand the forces that shape news production and their implications on news consumption. We are going to also look at the typologies of these forces, new media, internet, mobile app mobile as change agents. We're going to actually look at that. All right, so the key terms, we say that consent means acceptance or approval of what is planned or done by another person, all right? Permission, approval, agreement, compliance. We use all these words to actually define consent, all right? The idea that we are giving permission or we're seeking approval or compliance, we're complying to something. All these are what we call, what we call manufacturing, what we call consent. And then, of course, when we talk about political economy, we're looking at the interplay between politics and economy. And when we say that, we know what economics mean. We mean the demand and supply, all right? The interplay of demand and supply. The idea that, demand, as in the current, market system, we see that demand actually drives supply, which means the power of the consumer, would actually, drive what is actually, produced, etc. Of course, and that is what we talk about in market economies, Now, so major functions of the media, according to what we know, and I'm sure in your media studies, we look at principles of media theories, etc. We say media is supposed to report events objectively, all right? That's the basic, Media is supposed to report events objectively as they occur to allow citizens to make informed political choices. So that is very crucial to the heart of media. But the question is that really the case, which we have actually started giving examples? Are the media giving objective, reporting? And when we say objective reporting, what do we mean by objectivity? For example, the selection of some stories over some stories. can that actually be determined as objective? But then, of course, what would actually make a media house choose one story over the other? What about space? All right, would they actually have space in the press, for example, if we want to give every story, equal chance to qualify? What about space? Then can we actually have about 1,001 pages of daily graphic if you want to actually have objectivity in news selection, for example? So these are some of the things that we're discussing. Evelyn, unmute. Evelyn, your hand is up. Okay.
Sir, please, I thought you asked a question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I thought you asked a question.
Okay, I suppose it was read.
I thought you asked a question.
Okay, that's fine. But you wanted to say something.
Yes, I wanted to say that in the manufacturing of consent, according to Noam Chomsky, the media does not present objectivity due to a lot of factors. So if you look at the ownership of the media, it's influenced the objectivity of the media in the sense that the owner of the media has his own ideology. He has his own party he belongs to. And he doesn't want to dirty the name of the public, the party, using his media. And so he's going to present facts that will make the party look good in the eyes of the public.
Yeah.
That is why the objectivity is not being played by a lot of media houses.
Fantastic. That's a very good point. But let's ask ourselves, why did Evelyn choose to use the word he to describe media ownership? Why was Evelyn using the word he?
Sir.
Yes.
Sir. So because nowadays the media house is owned by an individual.
Yes, but it's because society has created it. So, society has made us understand or think that property, ownership of property and business, for example, is a function of perhaps the male gender. Do you get it? And so in our environment, you hear a lot of people use the word he in the demonstration or the discussions. It's because of the male dominant, society that we have. Are you with me? And that's the kind of constraint, that's the kind of forces that we're talking about. Julius, you want to say something?
No, Doc, no. Please go ahead.
Okay. So again, we're looking at control government abuses. We said that one of the functions of media is to control governmental abuses of power through investigative journalism, etc. But of course, we'll come to know whether this is the case. So Chomsky and co. Actually talk about, the difficulty in us identifying that media in democratic countries are actually, propaganda tools or actually, propaganda system, because they have some freedoms, because at some point they go after government, because at some point they go after, powerful forces in society. And then of course they have freedom, to actually speak on public issues or to speak on issues. Again, we don't see them having a formal censorship in place, i.e., we don't see government saying that, yes, you can report on that, you cannot report on that. And so we don't see that these are propaganda tools. Again, the biggest part of it is that because most media in democratic countries are actually private media, we think that they're not propagandists, all right? Because we actually think that when the media is very much, government or controlled by government, that's where we think that they are propaganda systems. But in countries where the media is very private, the media is, without censorship, the media environment is without censorship, the media is very active in questioning government here and there. We think that that is enough to actually, proclaim that the media is without propaganda. But that is not the only thing, because these are just the basics. That the most difficult ones to see through are the other factors that we're going to discuss. And they talk about, the filters that we can actually see, through the media as propaganda tools, and that's what we're actually going to look at. So the character of the news media, according to them, says that the news media is business. All right, and we all know that the media actually sit on what we call advertising, for example, revenues. Now, without advertising revenues, most media houses will collapse. And that should actually explain why they do or they behave the way they do. One, they have to be sensational so that people can buy their newspapers or can actually subscribe to the channels. All right. Now, the more viewership or eyeballs and earpieces they get, the more advertising revenue, because they can show the numbers to those companies and say, look here, we have 1 million plus people tuning into us. And so that's the reason why you must advertise with us. And that actually must call for certain level of manipulation, like sensationalism, for example. Sensationalizing stories so that it can actually attract people to sort of watch the news or to sort of read the papers or to actually tune into your media house or the media platform. Now, with that comes with advertising revenues. Yeah, Anas.
Sir, but one way or the other, I think it's not the media's fault. So because they have to survive.
Okay,
so do you understand?
We haven't come to that one yet. We're now discussing some of the forces. Right. So, but I get the argument because obviously, there must be survival, but it does not mean that that's the only way that the media can survive. Yeah, Gifty.
So then can you say that some of the tools they use is
Yeah, I think that's what we discussed earlier on. We talked about it earlier on when Julius raised it. But we will see those tools as we go on with the discussion.
Hello, sir.
Yeah? Yeah, can we hear you?
Yeah, I was saying that. So can you say one?
Yeah, your line keeps muting itself. Gifty. All right. So yeah, so we're saying that the news is business, and so this means that the news is subject to same biases as any other product. All right. So when companies are actually producing, they're looking at the supply, they're looking at the demand, they're looking at obviously other things like the legal constraint that should actually shape the way the product is made. So we're saying that news is also the same way affected by the environment that actually shaped the product. All right. And so we say that news, just as products and services, are subjected to biases, of product biases, like the interest of the supplier or the manufacturer, of course the interest of the consumer, of course of the people, of course the product has to also fall within certain legal what they call requirement, and that's why they would say that this product or this advert is subject to FDA, what do you call regulations. For example, the standard authorities regulations, product must actually fit within that. In the same way, media has those kind of biases that has to actually fulfill. And they say that this means that news media, or they distort the news to retain viewers, of course, as we said, and also to keep in favor of their sponsors, sensationalizing stories to make them seem more extreme and interesting, or not airing a story which shows their sponsor in a bad light. So you would realize that when you listen to news stories, you're hearing this way chocolate, they're hearing in social. Now, obviously, that is the sponsor of a particular news stories. And if you have a kind of a report in the same what do you call news item that actually paints this way in a very bad light. Let's say the FDA had actually conducted an investigation into, or let's say the standard authority has conducted an investigation into this way what do you call chocolate, or this way that product that is actually sponsoring that particular news. Do you really think that in that particular news item, you're going to have that story there, or you're going to have that story in its entirety as identified by the FDA or by the standard authority? Certainly not, because that particular product or that particular brand is the one that is actually sponsoring that news items. And so they're going to actually distort it in a way that would not actually impact on the brand. I hope you're following.
Yes, Doc.
Okay. All right. Again, we look at government influences, and not only government influences, but the influences of powerful entities and powerful people. So they talk about TV programs, for example, or newspaper, etc. They show the government in a bad light. It is very subtly shunned out of access. Obviously, if a TV program or a newspaper must put government in a very terrible light, you know what happens. And in this country, obviously across regimes, we've heard stories that journalists actually talk about. We were contacted to pull down this story. We were contacted to do this. We were asked to actually not to follow this particular story. And we all know those issues in our public space. I particularly have had experience firsthand where we had a program with TV3, and we were told, TV3 actually called us to say that story has to be pulled down because of authority from above. They've directed that we cannot actually host that particular story, or we can actually put that story through. And there are countless of examples across the regimes. So yes, when media has to put government on its toes in a particular light, obviously they actually kind of shunned of access to either news itself or access to advertising revenues. So you go to a ministry wanting a particular story, they will tell you your particular media is not welcome because you keep putting the government in a very bad light. And not only that, but also private investors and other big businesses would actually shun you if you have to be putting them in a very bad light or actually broadcasting stories that actually taint them in a particular way. And that is some of the practices that, or some of the forces that we talk about, that they sort of contribute to the way that we see things, because there are so many of these organizations or institutions that would not want us to hear what is happening to them. And so we look at the only ones that we know or that are being brought to us. Now, political economic factors, Nana.
Sir.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sir, please, my worry is concerning the forces. Mm-hmm. It looks like a little observation I made was that it looks like the only force I understood was the media, because it looks like all the other forces were had connections to the media. So you say the governmental forces, yet they use the media. So it was like the media is the main force that is used to manufacture consent. Am I right?
You're very right. I mean, you remember when we did mediatization? Now, the understanding is that in the current system, there is nothing that we could do without the interplay of the media, right? It is difficult to actually put society on one side and the media on the other side. The media had become so what is called omni, not omni, but what's the other word? I'm trying to recollect what to use. The media has become so dominant, all right? Has become almost everywhere there's a media play, all right? And so media, we cannot escape the contribution of the media within the space. Are you with me? Of course, there are times where you could actually see the other agents, perhaps without, the use of the media, propagating in a way that could actually manipulate the people, all right? But because of the ubiquitousness of the media, right, it is difficult to actually separate the media from the manufacturing consent or from propaganda. Are you with me?
Okay.
But to add to your story, let's strip the media out. You know, culture is actually one of the propaganda tools that could be employed. All right, the idea that our upbringing is within a particular cultural context. You certainly have some beliefs about some people, you know, because of the upbringing. It may not be media interplay, all right, or it may not be the function of the media, but the idea that we've been raised, you know, how we have been raised, like, you know, in your house, you are maybe a Christian family or you're a Muslim family. That process of upbringing would tilt you towards one side of the religious, you know, dichotomy, and have a certain perception of the other side. Are you with me?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can, yes, strip off, you know, the media and still see manufacturing consent from the other forces, culture, you know, government, maybe family units and settings, etc. All right, without necessarily bringing the media. But we actually put the media here because of the ubiquitousness of the media in the kind of things that we do, you know, as public. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's all right. All right. Okay. So we're saying that the political economy factors that shape the news, you know, are one. So the political and economic system of the society in which the media operates, political and economic status of the country, right? Obviously, the dominant culture. So if we take the political and economic status of the country, you know, as one of the, you know, factors that actually shape, or political economy that actually shape the production of media. I mean, let's look at instances where, you know, as a middle income or as a low middle income, you know, country, you have your media space being sponsored by foreign interest. All right, let's say we see Americans giving scholarship to the media players. We have seen quite a number of people who have been to the US for training as a result of, you know, US, you know, scholarships. If you ask what do you call Ben Efson, Uncle Ben, he will tell you his, you know, his sponsorship to the US and where he got opportunity to learn Poland, for example. Quite a number of our media players, you know, or media journalists have had, you know, sponsorship to go abroad, you know, to study. So assuming that the US embassy actually offers you a scholarship to go and study abroad, and then you come back and there's an issue between Ghana and the US, how do you think your reporting would look like? Who can answer that? You've had a sponsorship by the US embassy. You've gone to study, you know, in the US. You came back. Now Ghana was signing what we call the DCA, the Defense Cooperation Agreement with America, which a lot of us demonstrated, including myself. How do you think we report such a story, Evelyn? Unmute.
Because you have been sponsored by US, you kind of, not to tarnish the image of US, even though they are bad, you present the news to make it look good that US didn't do anything bad. It has to do with initially when you said our cultural setting and our upbringing. This question is in that particular context. Because you feel like if I say this, they will probably disown me or strip me of the financial assistance they've given me or something. So it's like you hold allegiance to US.
Yeah.
And so you're going to say something to make them look okay and then put Ghana in a very negative position.
Yeah. And even when you do not want to seek to do that, you know, very plainly, you probably want to embellish the story, right? So that you do not, you know, sort of be seen as being biased, but you may not want to put the entire negativity out there. Julius?
Yeah, so exactly as you just explained, Doc, you wouldn't want, I mean, there are two sides here. You are from Ghana, and Ghana is your mother country, and then the USA too has helped you. So you would report the issue in a manner that you wouldn't blame USA too much. So I think the only thing you will do is to, speak to the positives. Try to explain to the Ghanaian people that, oh, this is not anything. It's going to help us. Take your time. You wouldn't be so harsh on them, on your mother country, that you people are trying. No, but you would find a way in, convincing them to buy into the whatever it is.
Excellent. Yeah. Now, even let's look at the current debate about the LGBT, and the kind of a pronouncement that the U.S. is actually putting across. They are basically threatening countries of withholding their support if they do not grant, or if they show open, a kind of a position to the LGBT debate. And because of that, you find reporting on these issues very measured. All right. I remember President Atamir's time when the question was posed, and then he said that, well, as far as he's concerned, the country is not subscribing. Powers can actually take their money. He's not actually bothered about that. But of course, he was bothered because if your economy is fundamentally supported by interest, who actually believe in that particular agenda, I don't think that you can go all out to say that you're not bothered, because in the public you may say something, but at the back door you may do something different, and that is what actually puts countries in dilemma, as Chomsky is saying. So political economic status of a country very much manipulates or shape the news, in a manner that we may not see it, but that is the reality, because the power distance, or the power between the politically, the economically powerful countries are not the same as, they are very wide, between these two countries. And so you'd realize that there will be some stories or some issues that low and middle income countries may not be so hard on because of the other economic forces that actually govern the way we actually see issues. When it comes to maybe geopolitical stories, for example, we always tilt towards where our help is coming from. So you could see that perhaps there's a feud between China and the US, or China and the UK. And Ghana is likely to actually side with perhaps UK or the US because of the economic ties between these two countries, and of course, other ties between us. Again, dominant cultural and social values, power distance, individualism versus collectivism is also another kind of forces that actually shape the news. If you read our news, for example, our news is very, male dominant, and that's why even Evelyn was using he to describe media ownership. All right, stories that actually come up in our news stances or on our news stances are predominantly a function of our culture and our social values, isn't it? Because you would find two stories between man and a woman. We are likely to read the story about the woman in a very bad light and the story about the man in a very positive light. Gifty.
Sir, please, the first question I wanted to ask, I was saying that, so is it that agenda setting is one of the tools used in manufacturing consent? Because it seemed to be.
Yeah. We have already said yes, isn't it? We've already said, we're saying that manufacturing consent actually relies on some tools, the propaganda tools, and obviously agenda setting is one of those. We'll come to the list of it, but certainly it is. Yeah. Are you with me?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
That's right. So we're saying that cultural dominant, all right, dominant cultures and social values actually determine or they shape the news. And some of them is even the conversation that we started, having about sexuality, all right. Sexuality, some people would argue that sexuality is socialization. It is because somebody would argue that it's because of the way you were brought up, all right? So because our cultures are very much, male and female dominant, obviously because our cultures are very much religion dominant, all right? Some conversation about homosexuality, LGBT, etc., would not be permitted, all right? And so long as they're not permitted in the conversation, then certainly acceptance or approval is also not permitted. So in one way or the other, somebody would argue that our consent for heterogeneity, i.e., men and woman, relationship, as opposed to, man-man or female relationship, is a function of manufacturing consent because of the way our society is structured, our values are structured, etc. Somebody would actually argue that, all right? And then again, the cultural national alignment or conflict would also, determine some of the news items that we hear, just as we've just said, we've had comprehensive sexuality education, LGBT policy, etc. There is almost, national policy in alignment with the cultural positions of the country, all right? And because of that, what you hear, what you see, etc., are actually influenced by that, even from policy perspective. And so that will shape the news. Do you get it? So these are some of the things that we're talking about. So let's look at the filters, that Chomsky, and Edward Herman actually give in terms of, the propaganda model. What are the filters that actually shape the news? The kind of things that we say are actually covering or, determining how we see the news and our interpretation to them. So they talk about size, ownership, and profit orientation as one of the filters, which means that the media size, who owns the media, and the idea that the media must exist, as Gifty one said, of course, is not, Anastasia, I think, said, of course, it's not their fault because they must live, all right? The idea that the media has to be ongoing means that there must be profit, all right? They must actually be in profit in order that they could be, in existence. Is that always the case? Of course, the advertising as license to do business, sourcing of media news, ideology, flag, etc., are some of the things that we're going to look at. So let's look at ownership. And I think one of you actually explained ownership in the earlier on. The media is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a small number of private companies owned by wealthy individuals, isn't it? I mean, you have Kennedy Japan owning, a media house. So you would think that, such a media house would be hugely influenced by his beliefs and his, kind of way of directions, for example. Do you really think that with a media house owned by Kennedy Japan, there will be objectivity in terms of news selection, in terms of what gets reported, etc., between MPP and NDC?
Never.
Yeah. So we're saying that ownership is one of the filters or one of the things that actually shape what we get to hear and what we get to discuss in terms of news items and in terms of our beliefs. All right. Now, if you have a news items or you have a news media that is actually owned by powerful forces like someone who is a gay or a lesbian, certainly you would have somehow a favorable coverage of LGBT. Maybe the forces such as readership and viewership may influence the way they report it, but certainly they would not have a very negative reporting as you would have in other ownerships, of the media. All right. The pressure of stockholders, directors, and bankers are also powerful forces affecting the content of these companies or media content. Thus, market profit-oriented forces would actually regulate or would actually influence, the media house. So it is not only about ownership, but it is also about those who are the big players in terms of giving out the news, or giving out, advertisement to the media houses would very much influence, how, they report. All right. Any questions or contribution on that? Any question on contribution on that one? Ownership. Okay. So the next is advertising, license to do business. So of course, as Anastasia said, media houses must exist. They must actually live. Of course, they have staff to pay. They have, logistics to actually take care of. They have to buy cars. They have to actually pay salaries. They have to maintain equipment, bring in new equipment, etc. Now, all these things require money. So how do you actually pay for them? You must actually, source for adverts, all right? And the sourcing for adverts, you have two places. You're actually having the public or government ads, all right? And then you're looking at the private ones. Now, both of them perhaps will require a certain level of viewership or a certain level of readership. But with the government one, you may not necessarily have the eyeballs or whatever, but the idea that you are favorable to them would, require that, or would be a plus for you to source advertising from government. From private, it may be because you will need, the eyeballs, or you need the viewership or the readership to convince them that indeed they would have the coverage that you need. So both instances mean that you must manipulate the news in a particular way. On the government side, you must give favorable, reporting. On the private side, you must be very sensational, a media house that people will tune into and give you those numbers in order that you can actually show, the extent to which you can give them, visibility or publicity. So advertising is one of the crucial, filters to shape the way, communication is done, or the media actually, shape, the thinking or the public mindset. So interest of advertisers can, before reporting the news itself is nothing more than filter or filler to get privileged readers to see the advertisement. Maintaining news reporters at all locations where news may break is not financially viable. And then as a result, news organizations become reliant on government PR, for example. Now, if you have followed some of the news items or news reports of the local radio stations, what do you normally hear? Local radio stations. What are some of the observations? What are some of the observations that you have made from the local media houses? Yeah? Anyone? Observations of the media, local media houses, the way they report. Yeah.
They don't do much of adverts, or like no advertisement that will interrupt their news reporting.
The local radio, the local media houses.
Yeah.
Okay, Rachel.
Okay, so usually the local radio stations, they take their news from the more popular radio stations. Usually that's what they do. They take their news and their issues from the popular radio stations.
Really? Don't Adom FM have their own news?
Okay, well, I thought you were talking about like the local.
The community stations. I'm not talking about the community radios. I'm talking about local language.
So this do you speak one language?
Yeah, but what are some of the key observations? What are some of the key observations that you've made, Deborah?
So when they are presenting the news, sometimes they over exaggerate.
Excellent.
And then yes.
Yeah. So why do you think they do that? So they will pause, they will have a conversation, they will laugh, they will say something, some funny stuff. Yeah, Elikem. Elikem, let's hear you. Okay, we can't hear Elikem. Yeah, who else?
Sir, they do that to engage us, like to attract their public.
Yes, one of the observations I've also made is that their news report, Yes, I'm saying that one of the news the observations I've made is that when the report news one week, okay, this week we're all talking about
Kevin, your line is bad.
And the following week they're also talking about the same thing. So we see that every time what this radio station is reporting, that's what they're also reporting. It's not like everybody doesn't have this or their own news to report.
Okay, we couldn't get that because the line was not good. Julius.
Right, Doc. So what I have also observed is that they mostly take sides in issues. So you will hear them reporting the issue, and then later bringing in their experiences, what they have observed some time ago in connection to what they are reporting, and then taking side. That is either saying, "Oh, this thing is bad" or "this thing is good." But
Excellent.
I don't think that's how we should the news story should be.
Excellent. Yeah. So when you hear them reporting, Tracy, come in.
In reporting the news, instead of them to actually just present it, they actually commentate on the news most of the time.
Excellent. Yeah. So these are some of the things that we're talking about. Now, why do you think they do that? And these are because I once heard, I remember when Ijaku was removed from office in terms of the energy minister, when he was removed from office. I once heard, I think Peace FM news bulletin. The guy paused when he mentioned it, paused and he said, "Oh, you know, Ijaku is my uncle." Then they were saying it in tree. Then they said, "Really?" The other one they said, "Really?" I said, "Oh yeah, he's my uncle, pa." And he said, "Oh, he's from that kind of thing." And I was asking myself, really? So is this news item? Now, what do you think is the impact of what they did in terms of saying, Ejako is my uncle, he's from Ahimfie or something like that? And what do you think is the impact on the on the listener or the consumer of the news?
Say, Sir, please, the public will have pity on that person, so their attention will come to the person's story. That's his side of the story, and they'll begin to take it from that person.
That's right. So essentially, they are watering down the magnitude of the issue. All right, because I think it was about some kind of deals, on one of the power, thing, and by personalizing it, bringing in, he's my uncle, he's from my himfie, etc. You are invariably reducing the seriousness of the story and bringing in personal, attachment, which means that there are people who are going to actually feel pity. And he mentioned the town that he's from, etc. Now, people associated with those places, etc., are going to have pity on him. And as a result, you're going to water down the seriousness of the report. So when they exaggerate, when they pass comic comments, when they are invariably throwing water on the story and taking away the seriousness of the news that's supposed to actually pass by. So you realize that these are some of the things that we're talking about. Again, by sensationalizing or bringing in entertainment, aspects of the news, or not of the news, but entertainment aspect to the news, to some extent, they are retaining their viewership because then people laugh and they find it funny and they find it, exciting, because we say that the news is too hard. People, I think, complain about the idea that it's always bad stories, it's always hard stories, etc. By doing that, of course, they are maintaining, listenership. People would listen to the news and then just laugh. But the essence of news has actually been taken away and been replaced with entertainment values. Are you with me? And these are some of the things that we're talking about, sensationalizing it in order that they can keep, listenership and viewership to gain, adverts to gain so many other things is what we're actually talking about. All right. Now, sourcing of news is also one dimension that we use to manipulate or shape, a news, because the sources that we get news from, usually you're talking about the bureaucratic sources. The principle of bureaucratic affinity, saying that only bureaucrats can actually satisfy the news bureaucracy. So if we need stories about governments, institutions, we're going to the same people. All right. So you have to go to the Ministry of Health for Ministry of Health stories. You have to go to Ministry of Defense for Ministry of Defense stories. Now, if you're not actually in the good books of these ministers or these bureaucracies, they're not going to give you news. So the idea that we need to go to those bureaucracies to actually prepare our news or to be seen as factual are actually a manipulative, tool, because the news is about the minister or it's about the ministry, and you're going there for that particular news. Now, we're only determining fact from the source. The idea that the news is actually coming from the ministry, we think is fact, all right? So if that news item had been manipulated by the ministry, unless we actually do other fact checking, and we know that some institutions, some media houses would only play that without actually cross-checking, without actually, what we call triangulating, and then they put that one out. And so because the news is coming from the ministry, yes, that's fact. And that actually ends the story or closes the story. And these are the kind of filters that we use to shape, our understanding of the issues. Again, you actually move to some places like the educational institution. Maybe you have a professor who is actually, well versed, so to speak, on the issue to actually give that side of the issue. But bureaucracies actually, as we talk about the principle of bureaucratic affinity, you are likely to have that professor in some kind of association or relationship with that ministry or with that minister because of the bureaucratic affinity that we're talking about. And as a result, they could manipulate or they could actually tinker with that particular story without us knowing or observing it. All right. And we pass it out as fact. So you see that there are instances in our system where some individuals have actually passed some commentaries or have given out some supposed fact. But then little did we know that they have association or some relationship with the subject matter that we're talking about. And it has happened several times in our system. All right. Now, I'll give some examples. I remember during the elections, all right, we all had we had this what do you call polls that were done, all right, and there was suggestion that yes, government was in the lead, but of course after the election, people started questioning why a certain academic had actually been appointed by the what do you call the government, because obviously of a certain relationship. So you realize that what we actually determine as news perhaps could be, kind of shaped or could be influenced by relationship without us knowing it. But then it will pass as factual. All right. So these are some of the things that we're talking about. So you've got to actually have a very in-depth understanding, a very in-depth, knowledge about, how some of these filters can shape the news, and make sure that you can go beyond that to establish, facts about, the news item, or to establish the other side of the story, in order to, escape, the consent that we're talking about. Any questions or contribution? Any questions or contribution? Okay. Now, let me give you another example before I come to flag. In the last election also, you remember the media houses were invited to the MPP's collation room or collation center. Do you remember? Which Anoche was, the guy called Anoche was actually showing the media houses how they have come to collate their tallies, all right, their votes. And eventually people are saying that that became the key sources for the media's reporting of the election results. Do you guys remember? Hello?
Hello, yes, sir. Yeah.
Are you guys following?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yes, we are.
All right. Now, when I think it was around 3 a.m. in the news that I saw, you know, that what do you call? I don't know whether I should call it gathering or that invitation by, you know, Anoche to the MPP's strong, is it the strong room, their tally room or whatever they call it. And he was going through how they have come to collate their votes. Now, immediately I saw that process. The only thing that came to my head was that the guy was actually trying to manufacture consent. Who can actually explain that? Or who saw that particular moment? Who saw that moment when the media was invited to MPP's collation center or MPP's collation room or whatever they call it? And Anoche was explaining the process. Nana?
Yes, so I saw that. Okay. I think he was trying to tell us how authentic their strong room was.
Exactly.
And from what they get their figures from, because the way they had projected everything, if you compare that to the NDC's stronghold I saw in the media, it was very poor as compared to that of the MPP. So it tells us that they have the facts, they have the authentic sources to get the figures from.
Excellent. So that's a typical manufacturing consent process, all right? And who can explain why I'm saying that? Obviously, Nana has actually given a hint. So if, for example, someone shows you a technology, all right, that is actually facilitated the process. So he goes on step by step and says, okay, step one, this is what we did. We scanned, you know, pink sheet or whatever, we load it onto the system. It comes to step two. Step two does that. It comes to step three. Now, once you are exposed to that particular process, there's a logical argument that he's building to come to a conclusion. So as a media person, you're sitting down and you say, oh, wow, this is very thorough. This is very, very, professional. This is very neat. And so the entire process put together would give you a very reliable result. Are you with me? So you're sitting down and appreciating the neatness, the technological, superiority behind the process, and the logical arrangement of the entire process. And that ends up in your mind, this must be believed. It's credible. All right. So immediately you have little doubt of the results that they have actually churned out, because everything that they've been shown, that you have been introduced to, amounts to a credible final result. Immediately I saw that images that the media was sitting there and the guy was taking them through. One thing that came to my mind was that this guy is manufacturing the consent of the media. And so I prepared a very short script, and I said that, in fact, one of our electoral laws, the laws governing or the policies or the rules of engagement must be that we must ban media houses from going into individual political parties, strong rooms, because you would have the tendency to report what they're saying as news, as fact, and without disclosing that you actually got it from the MPP stronghold. And that's exactly what some allegations are coming out as they did. I don't know how far it's true, because I heard some stories saying, the guy at Metro TV, what's his name? Paul Ademotri, saying that they got the details from MPP in a strong room. I don't know how far it's true. But yeah.
Say myself, I was working in one media house. I wouldn't mention the name, and we had our people on the ground who were giving us the figures. But at a certain point in time, the figures weren't coming in. Then we had, I think, an MPP platform. Then my supervisor was like, okay, so since the figures from the region which I was in, which was the Western region, wasn't coming in, then we should take the figures on the MPP platform. So basically, all the figures that we were accumulating from that region was from the MPP platform, because our people on the grounds weren't giving us the figures.
That's it. Meanwhile, you have a target to achieve.
Exactly.
You know? So you'll be forced to do that. And that's the point that I'm saying. Now, if you do not have that sophistry to determine that this guy is trying to manipulate the thinking, and you see, the way it was, I worked it throughout, and I was like, wow, this is very convincing. But certainly it's manufacturing concept, because how would you prove that indeed they have scanned the exact pink sheet that they got from the polling station onto their system, but not any other pink sheet that they have actually put onto their system? Now, he showed examples, all right, of the pink sheet that they have actually scanned. And my question was that he cannot show all the pink sheets. So he would actually choose some ones that have been signed by both MPP and NDC agent as an example. What if he shows 20 examples of those ones signed, but the remaining that he didn't show the media are the ones that they haven't signed? What if he does that? You wouldn't be able to prove. But because he used some examples to prove that indeed these pink sheets were signed by the MPP and NDC agents, and they were scanned, uploaded onto the system, went to stage 1, went to stage 2, went to stage 3. The assumption is that the rest of the pink sheets are actually valid, actually credible, and with the kind of methodological, what they call sophistry that they have demonstrated in showing the results, they must be true. And that's what we actually bought, So in manufacturing consent, you may not see it that someone is manipulating your understanding and your approval. You have to really ask yourself a series of questions in order to identify that, yes, indeed, this approval is being created by somebody. But because most of our media guys do not have that sophistry, they sit and they think, oh, this is genuine. I am not in any way disproving the MPP's collation. No, I'm using it as an example of how consent can be manufactured. And therefore, you must have that sophistry to ask questions. So, for example, if the media houses wanted to be thorough in the understanding, they probably could ask the gentleman that, okay, can I actually choose the examples as opposed to you choosing it? Because he was the one choosing where to click, all right? What if you have 100 examples and I decide to go and pick any of them to check whether those ones were signed or not? It didn't happen. He was the one controlling the system and telling people that, yeah, this has been signed, and this is the figure, and this is the figure. How true can that be? Again, the back-end systems, you were not there. Where they scanned the document onto the system, nobody was there. But you were only called upon to witness the final product. What happened at the back end where the systems were uploaded? Those questions were not asked. And so the comprehensiveness of the system that he was demonstrating became the source for fact, and people started reporting it. We have to be very, very sophisticated in seeing the way people actually manipulate, our consent, for example, and we have to ask questions. All right. Now the next one is FLAC, and we saw what happened to TV3, Winston. All right. we saw what happened to Winston. No, is it not Winston? What's the guy's name? The one who reported the figures.
Okansi.
Okansi. Yeah. We saw what happened, the flag that he received.
Okansi.
Yeah, Okansi. And because of flag, obviously, media houses want to be cautious in the way they report things, not only on the elections, but in many other topics. There are some topics that people want to raise, but they can't raise because of flag. For example, which media house in Ghana would have the audacity to report LGBTQI in a very favorite light? Which media house? Or at least not in a very favorite, but be balanced in their reporting. Which media house can do that? You can't, because the society has a particular premise that they are operating on. Immediately you want to give a balanced reporting, a fair hearing. Say, okay, let's get people of LGBTQ background and let's get people of other background to debate this issue on TV. I'm telling you, maybe the next morning your media house will not be there. All right? People will go and ban it because they will say you are subscribing to what? LGBTQ agenda. So FLAC is one of the tools that we use to manipulate or to actually shape the agenda or shape the news in order that we can actually fall in line. So FLAC is the term given to negative responses to a media statement or program. This is very bad for that company as it can lead to them losing business and profit. To avoid getting FLAC, news stations would avoid reporting certain opinions or facts, isn't it? Negative responses through phone calls, letters, petitions, you get them. Obviously, people will shun, people can demonstrate against you, etc. Now, what stories, apart from the LGBTQ, have we seen media houses shun or avoid reporting on? What stories? What are some of the stories? For example, weed, yeah, cannabis, or weed, or some of these stories, you never have media houses, talk about them or give balanced, kind of conversation on them. All right. What other topics? Religion. Yeah. Religious issues. They are very, very thorny issues. Media houses wants to avoid that. Obviously, the dominant one is what you always hear. All right. You hear mostly Christianity. Very hardly would you hear anything about Islam in our media houses. All right. And even if you compare Islamic to traditional religion, that's even terrible. All right. Very, very terrible. People do not even want to talk about traditional religion. All right. So the dominant one is Christianity. That's the safe haven. Everybody wants to talk about that. It's always safe, right? Islamic, it's a no-go zone. Yeah. Or traditional religion, that's completely out of the picture. All right. What else? What else that you would expect flag from? Okay. So the next is fear. Fear is also one of the things that actually shape, our news. And in the past, it was called anti-communism because anti-communism was the fear, that democratic countries wanted to avoid. You do not want to hear communism, news, etc. But these days, it's about, fear, putting fear in people in order that they can actually comply. So we are talking about stories about terrorism, etc. Stories about, what do you call, um, um, what are the things that can actually give fear in people or present fear in people? Yeah, Evelyn.
Pandemics.
So
yeah,
it happened in Nigeria, which is the Boko Haram.
Yeah.
It caused a lot of fear and panic in citizens.
That's right. There is a story on the George Bush and then Kerry, election where, Kerry was actually in the lead in public opinion polling. And the night before the election, they immediately, apparently, the Republicans deliberately made the news, some of the news houses, sort of publish, or apparently Osama bin Laden appeared in the news to suggest that he was going after America. And immediately after that speech, George Bush came to speak tough, to say that he will protect Americans wherever and whenever, and he will go after Osama bin Laden. That changed the game. Immediately, the public opinion actually swung towards George Bush, and he won the election. So the idea that people are controlled with fear, and as Evelyn said, Boko Haram, etc. Once people actually see that, they want to move towards authority. I mean, the issue about crunch, credit crunch, pandemic, etc. These are things that whenever they happen, the population immediately back authority, they back president. And so you realize Nanado taking advantage of the pandemic in terms of his fellow Ghanaians. I'm coming to your homes this evening, etc. If you look at the initial reaction, it was very much a country behind the president. Everybody pays attention, listen to what the president is saying, because we're afraid of the pandemic and we want to follow what he's saying. So the first lockdown, not even a single soul was in town. All right, we're all obeying what president says, etc. Rightly so, but we're saying that these are some of the mechanisms that authority uses to shape, our understanding of, news, etc. Of course, the advent of internet and mobile, we say that they are change agents. They've come to sort of take away these filters that we're talking about, the editorial, the ownership filters, the idea that news is actually chosen by some editors and some items do not make the news, had been taken away by the internet, for example, because people can sit in their homes. We know about citizen journalism. They can take the stories and push the story to become what? To go viral. And so there are some stories that, given the traditional news items or the traditional news outlets, we wouldn't have actually heard about them. But because of the new media, because of citizen journalism, people can use their phones, capture the stories, push it, and then they go viral in order that we can actually, hear about them, etc. So there is a thinking that the advent of internet and mobile had actually reduced, those filters that we're actually talking about, and brought in democracy to news, for example, making sure that other, news items would have space, would have, some kind of visibility. But can we really say that's the case? Because we know that ownership of internet and ownership of mobile is also a function of economic status, isn't it? There are some people who still do not have access to the internet, who still cannot have smartphones. And as a result, we still have some stories not making it to the public domain. But of course, we can't actually say entirely that internet and mobile, for example, hadn't actually brought in some advances. They have. They have actually indeed reduced the capacity or the force or the power of traditional media, and had allowed stories that otherwise wouldn't have actually seen in the public domain into the public domain. So there had been some improvement, in that side of story. But of course, the limitations of new media, we have actually talked about them. Access is one key. The fact that internet is not everywhere, is actually key. I mean, but if you look at the last elections, for example, there were so many, campaigns that were unleashed into the public that actually came from people who are not necessarily party people. But it happened because they had access to internet, they had access to smartphones, they had access to a certain knowledge base that they could use to create some of these, campaigns and then put it out there in the public. So yes, internet and mobile phones have actually come to sort of democratize the space. All right. Okay. Any questions or contribution? Any questions or contribution on manufacturing consent? So we've seen the way that the society, the players in the society, etc., try to seek our approval or try to manufacture our approval in a manner that we do not even see that they are trying to do that. And we think we are freely giving consent, but indeed it is as a result of they manipulating us in one way or the other for us to actually sort of consent to the happenings in society. And I'm sure you guys have actually taken critical look at it and could question so many other debates in the system for us to know that indeed we're having a very thorough kind of conversation in the system. Yeah. Any questions or contribution? Anyone? Anyone, please. Tracy. Tracy, come in. Unmute yourself.
Okay. So when you were citing the scenario of the MPP strong room incident, I actually observed that this time around, it wasn't just the public that were influenced. It's almost like a chain reaction. It started from the institution, the strong room personnel, then the media, and then the public. So the media could actually fall prey to such the manufacturing consent.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're definitely right. And even look at the reporting of the LGBTQ. All right. Look at the players who are leading the conversation. You have the churches. All right. You have what do you call some powerful institution like For Harmony and his group. All right. Can you say that the media is not actually falling to that consent, that manufacturing of the consent? The media is, because media, which we began by saying should have an objective position, balanced reporting, all right? The media is not able to do that. Why? Because majority of the players in the media, from editorial to whichever, predominant of them are straight people, yeah? They are, what do you call it? Is it heterosexual? Is that the word? Yeah? Is that the word?
Yes, it's heterosexual.
Yeah.
Heterosexual.
Exactly. The majority of them are heterosexual people. And so certainly the story would not be balanced, would it? And there are a lot of beliefs in the conversation. There are a lot of beliefs said. I mean, I said to myself, of course, I am not a promoter of alternative sexuality. But let's be frank and ask ourselves, are we being objective in the way that the reporting is going? It looks like we are speaking from belief sets, and people say, according to the Bible, according to the Bible. I mean, for Christ's sake, the Bible is not the only thing that people use to describe or to demonstrate beliefs, isn't it? Other people have other books. Of course, it could be that the Christian and Islamic books do not talk about that. What if somebody else's book actually does? So there are multiplicity of views. So you would want to hesitate in using a certain reference point that you have been socialized with in making your argument, because then that actually falls flat. So for me, I think that we are being manipulated to consent to things because of the way the society is structured, but we're not free willingly giving our views on things. If we would exercise some restraint and ask ourselves, indeed, from which base are we articulating our debate or articulating our opposition to something, then we could understand, how some forces are actually, sort of constraining our thinking, because if you have the powerful Christian faith, coming out and saying we're against this, etc., and so many other of the media players are actually part of those powerful, you're a Catholic or you are a Methodist, etc., and you see your reverend ministers, etc., on TV, on radio saying that they're against. Who are you to actually report otherwise? Do you get it? So majority of the conversation are not objective, or we're not free willingly giving them because of the powers behind them, But if we could exercise some restraint and ask the critical questions without necessarily, placing values on the issues. Perhaps we can advance conversation and we can say that, yeah, the public sphere is free of those forces, but certainly they're not. Yeah. Any other views? Any other views? Any other question or contribution? Okay, guys, I think that, Julius, what time are we supposed to close?
10 a.m. dog.
All right, can we do propaganda? I think it falls within this one straight away, so that we'll have only one lecture remaining. Or you guys are tired?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We should do propaganda.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, good. So let's do propaganda and then we can close. All right. So in tying in with manufacturing consent, as you guys have already been pinpointing, it's the propaganda tools that we use to actually describe or talk about manufacturing consent. Okay. All right, so when we hear the word propaganda, what comes to our minds? Oh, am I out of it? Okay, I think.
Lies.
Yeah. Okay.
Bias.
Bias, yeah. Okay, who else?
Lies.
Lies, okay.
Misconceptions.
Misconceptions, okay. Can you see the slide now? Can you see the propaganda slide? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Yeah, Anastasia, you were saying something.
Sir, please, bringing out deliberate or intentional, or like when you frame an information that is meant to deceive someone intentionally.
Excellent. So we say that the propaganda is the deliberate, systematic attempt to shape perceptions, isn't it? To manipulate cognitions and direct behavior to achieve a response that furthers the desired intent of the propagandist. So just like you guys have said, you are looking at how do I manipulate somebody's thinking? All right, how do I get someone on my side by putting up certain constraints, certain impediments, or certain views in order that could actually influence that person's thought? That's what we do as propagandists, all right? And that's what we're talking about. Manufacturing consent is actually a propaganda function, all right? It's a function of propaganda. The idea that we could put some things in place in order to shape someone's thinking on our side without the person actually realizing that, is what we do. So the propaganda features is it tells only the side of the promoter who wants the audience to know, right? And that's what we're talking about. I mean, the idea of, LGBTQ conversation, the idea that we're against it is actually coming from the ones who are actually promoting it, i.e. promoting the opposition, but they don't give room for alternative ideas. They don't give room for other people to express their views. It's all about this is not acceptable in our society, and case stop. All right, we just can't tolerate that. But of course, if we say that the media is objective, then of course we're supposed to give the other side of the story in order that people will make an informed judgment whether indeed they don't want it or they want it. But that conversation doesn't actually get discussed in the media. It is something that Ghanaians abhor, and that's it. Really, have we come to that level of acceptance? No one wants to actually know that part of the story. Yeah, it appeals to emotions. Okay, Anas or Rachel.
Sir, and then about the LGBTQ issue, and even if the media is always asking for their ideas, the people in charge of the interviewing always try to make them look as if they are quote unquote weird people in the society, and so sometimes they don't even feel comfortable coming out to the media to even come and talk.
Excellent. Because the person interviewing the LGBTQ person has already made up, views, that this is abhorrent. And they have subjected their interviews with so many values that that individual who's actually granting an interview would not even feel comfortable to answer those questions. So it's fantastic, the point that you raised, Rachel. All right. It appeals to emotions rather than intellect, and it benefits the promoter. That's what propaganda does. All right. So who uses propaganda? Obviously, we know.
Sir.
Yeah, and
Sir, please, Akufo-Addo's policy on free education or free SHS policy, says there propaganda.
Okay, explain it for us.
So I'm asking you, sir, because although the main purpose was to make Ghanaians or citizens believe that kind of policy, like it went so straight, like people were not really, all the people were questioning about it, but it was like more than 50% of the people were into that policy.
Yeah.
So do you understand?
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I think I've made my position clear on that. I see it as a propaganda, to be very honest with you. And the position that I maintain, I think I've shared that view in class, is that the free SHS is very much elitist than what it is, or what they say it is, because it is about making the rich people richer. All right. Because if you have 100 Ghana cedis to share, all right, share for 5 people, all right. Now, these 5 people have 3 different problems that they have to use the 100 Ghana cedis for. So each of them is getting 20 cedis to take care of education, to take care of health, to take care of, let's say, electricity, all right. Now, if you have 2 of these 5 people who can take care of their own education, their own electricity, and their own health, all right, why don't you eliminate them and then give the rest of the money to the 3 people so that you can increase their capacity? All right. Now, you decide to give all of them, whereby the other 2 already have 200 Ghana cedis, and then you're giving them more money. For me, I don't think that a free SHS makes sense in society. So I could term it as propaganda, because it actually emboldens, or it makes the rich people richer. Of course, the argument of sharing the national cake equally could be advanced by other people, all right? But I disagree, because in our society, those who have more money, all right, they go back to their homes and then bring out their relatives, children to take care after, or to take care of them, all right? So when you have more money in your family, you go and adopt, or you go for your aunties or your cousins or your sister's child to take care of them. And so the society is such that those who have more money, broad chest, should take more responsibility so that you can reduce the burden on the other people. That's what we do in our traditions, in our society. So I think, Anas, I agree with you if we have to actually see it from a propaganda frame. I think so too.
Yes, I mean, very, 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 very. And the way he was so quick about it, and then he established that within a period of a year. Like, this MPP government,
but I think others would have the opposition to that. Whoever has an opposition to that, you can also air it. All right. Any other views? Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah, Evelyn.
I think this is debatable in the sense that,
yeah,
let me say, our leaders are seeing certain things in certain angles. And then we, as the citizens, are also seeing the same thing in a different angle.
Yeah.
Because from my point of view, I believe that they are practicing egalitarianism irrespective of our socio-economic background. So whether you are rich or poor, we are not segregating anyone out of the free SHS policy. We are giving everyone that free opportunity. Mind you, there are people who have been rich before due to issues like death of the breadwinner. That person who has been once been rich has been stripped of her wealth. What about that one too?
Yeah.
So how do we equally identify that this thing is rich? And so should be given, shouldn't be given that opportunity for, and should be given that opportunity for free SHS. So therefore, you are going to say that, okay, those in the urban areas are automatically classified as rich, which is bad.
Okay.
And it can't fit.
Okay, so that's Evelyn's. Before I respond to Evelyn, who wants to? Isaac. Isaac, come in.
Yeah. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Isaac.
Yes, I think I side with Evelyn to a larger extent because you can't use
Isaac, your line is gone bad. Okay, who else can come in until we have Isaac? Nana, come in.
Yeah, so I feel that the free education is a good policy, not too good policy though, but to a larger extent, it helps people access education. But my problem I have with the government is that there are people that can pay for the education. There are people that are richer, but there's a situation whereby their kids and the poor ones are all going to school for free, which is not fair. I feel that the richer people in the society should be paying for the education, whilst the lesser people that can't pay for it should be given to them for free. The problem is that earlier it was done through scholarships, but the institutions that were managing the scholarships were manipulating them. It was given to their children, their families, people that are richer. I even heard last year that even someone like the Minister of Education and the then Minister for Procurement or something, she was even given a scholarship, and I felt that she could have accessed it or paid for herself. So I feel free education is good though, but the richer one should pay for it.
Okay, Isaac, are you here? Are you still here? Isaac is not back. Okay, Elikem.
Yeah, sir, please. I also side with Nana, because there's no point, in giving free education to everyone if some people feel they can afford it. So it all comes down to the point that there are no structures, governing our sectors all over the country. So that's why we're having this kind of problems, whether it should be free, whether some people should even pay for it. So that's my contribution.
Excellent. Okay, Evelyn, let me answer Evelyn. Okay, Nana, come in. Or is it Anas?
So it's me. I want to add up to what Elikem just said. So if governments continue to help those that have high income or those that earn high in the society, then there wouldn't be excess progress in the states. You get, because that money can be channeled to do other important things. But if they are splitting that money into two and helping other people that can even help themselves to survive, then it will retard progress in the society or in the states. So do you understand?
All right.
Yeah, now, it's true.
Yeah, go on. Now, let me, Evelyn, let me clarify your concern. Let me share. When we talk about, means testing to actually identify who can and who cannot, we're not saying use urban, classification as a means to identify who can or who cannot. Because in those countries that have actually done means testing, they do not use urbanization alone. I mean, there are measures that you use to identify whether somebody can or cannot, all right? We know that there are urban poor. There are people who live in urban spaces, but they are poor. So in terms of identifying who can or who cannot, it is not something that you can just do by watching people's faces, etc. There are mechanisms to determine that, and people have been able to do that. The basic argument is that we have to find a way to identify who can and who cannot to give that particular benefit. Now, the idea that, yes, everybody has to benefit from the national cake, I get that. But my point is that in instances where the country has so many problems, as what do you call Anas and Elikem and Nana has actually attributed. You want to identify, because don't forget, we do not have only education problem, we have health problems. Currently, as we speak, a lot of people do not have quality health care. All right. So the money that you would use to pay for my school fees or my son's school fees, for example, if my son were to be here and then going to a free SHS, the money that you would use to pay for my son's school fees, spare that for the other person's health care. Do you get a point, the argument that I'm making? By that, you are actually eliminating issues in society. But if you say that because of, what do you call, access to, the national cake equally, then you're not actually playing to the traditions of the country. I mean, in this country, we know, I for example, take care of about 7 of my, family members, all right? Now, if I have someone taking care of 7 of my family members, and then you have the same person, son or daughter, enjoying free education, I don't think it's fair. More so, your idea that some people have been rich before and then they are poor. We're talking about your current state, not your past state. So if the state can have a mechanism to identify who is currently poor or who is currently not able to afford and who is currently will be able to afford, that's what we're talking about. Having a mechanism to be able to identify who can and who cannot, to extend the facilities, what we're talking about. Again, you cannot do that in a day. So for me, I was thinking that the government could have given a moratorium. Let's say 5 years, free SHS for everybody. By the 5th year, we would have developed the mechanisms to wean off those who can, to come up the project. That is what we're talking about, all right? So yes, there are quite a lot of debate around this, but we're not saying that you should, close your eye on other factors. Saying, yeah, guys, hold on for me, just a minute. Just a minute.
Sir, this I'm about to say is quite personal.
I say hold on. Hold on, Ronnie.
Charlie Mani Kangu Yasu, Mani Kangu Yasu, Mani Kangu Yasu.
Boy.
All right, guys, go on. Yeah, who was on the floor?
Evelyn.
Evelyn. So, hello.
Say.
Evelyn, can we hear you?
Yes, sir. So I was saying that personally, I have been a victim of this scholarship thing before, where I don't know which kind of mechanism they used, but my name appears to be part of the scholarship to be given.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know what happened, and they stripped it off. Mm-hmm. Now, my question, my worry from last year till now is why? Because everything is clear that I needed that help.
Okay.
Why was I stripped of such a thing?
And
up to now, there haven't been anything said to me as to why such a thing has been done.
Okay, so that one we cannot answer for you here. Obviously, there could be administrative issue, but we're talking about general principle of state policy. All right, how state policy could actually be advanced in order that can actually.
I asked that question because of the issue of you raising structures and all that. That was why I asked that question.
Yeah. So the issue about structures, of course, people have actually hinted the idea that yes, it may not be well prepared and it may not be well administered, etc. Then it means we're not developing or we're not prepared to develop. If we use the lack of proper implementation of structures as the reasons why everybody must have free education, then it means this country will not go anywhere. Are you with me? So we're talking about principles of how we can function. So can you put proper systems in place, well administered, in order that those who need help can have help. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the malfunctioning of the systems or the malfunctioning of the structures. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're saying that per developmental policies, you do not give everybody free education. I don't believe it. All right, because when you do that, you are empowering those who have more money, to be more powerful in society. You are not actually equitably distributing state wealth. I don't think so. And I side with the finance minister clearly when he questioned the logic in giving everybody money. I side with that finance minister at the time. Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead. So we're saying that propaganda is used by religious bodies, obviously politicians, military, media, etc. We use propaganda. So the propaganda tools, it says that logical fallacies, errors in reasoning. So false cause, inaccurate drawing a cause and effective relationship between the two events that follow one after the other. No, let me just go to let me see. Okay. All right. So we say that when we are actually identifying propagandas, we're actually looking at a certain tools that people use in addressing or in identifying some issues. For example, false cause. Now, saying that something is as a result of another event or an event is another event without necessarily demonstrating the true characters of these events could actually be a propaganda. Now, when it says that inaccurately drawing a cause and effect relationship between two events that follow one after the other is a propaganda. All right. So, for example, if something happens and in the society, maybe someone had actually gone to steal something, all right, and the person on their way had been hit by a car. In most cases, people can say, "Oh, it's as a result of the person's act for stealing, that's why he's been hit by a car." All right. Now, those events could or might have actually happened, coincidentally, but quickly we draw relationship between them and say it is because of the act of stealing. That's why he's been hit by a car. And in our political system, we normally hear those things, all right? We normally see things that people actually draw, parallels in events and say that this is as a result of, something that actually happened prior or earlier, all right? And overgeneralization is also one of the propaganda issues, making a sweeping statement that does not provide any reasonable supporting evidence as proof is also, some of the propaganda tools. All right. Now, the study of propaganda is actually, compartmentalized in terms of discipline. Each discipline has its own propaganda mechanisms. Now, we have propaganda in history, in journalism, in political science, in sociology, etc. All right. For propaganda in history, as we said, we are sometimes using events that have occurred and the subsequent events as means to draw, propaganda. All right. So emphasis on events and the subsequent event as possible effects of propaganda is what we use, in history. All right. In journalism, the emphasis on spin management, all right, or news management or spin shapes information, emphasize positive features and downplaying negative ones, is what we use as propaganda. As we actually said earlier, when there's a news item and people are trying to, kind of exaggerate, the items or kind of pour water on it, it's part of the thing that we do, The study of propaganda as political science is when we have an emphasis on ideologies, ideologies of the practitioners and the dissemination and impact of public opinion. So if you look at the the ideas or the ideologies of the left and the right, all right? Sometimes you hear people describing the right as property owning democracies, and as if they are wrong, all right? That owning property is actually a bad thing to do. Sometimes you hear people describing the center left as socialist, all right? And as if that is actually, wrong. So we use certain word choices to depict, ideological positions in a certain light, all right? And that in itself is a propaganda tool. And for sociology, emphasis on social movement and the counter propaganda that emerges in opposition, all right? So if we look at the stories as we're talking about the LGBTQ, instances and the instances of straight people, these narratives are actually captured in propaganda, settings where people actually see the LGBTQ as bad and the straight people as good. All right, and that kind of word choices are used in the description of these two sets. But in any case, we may not even look at it as a two extremes anyway. There are some people who could also be in between, the gays and lesbians, and then the straight people. How about that descriptions as well? All right. And then propaganda as psychology, emphasis on determining the effect of propaganda on individuals. So how does propaganda tools play on individuals thinking and their behavior, etc., is also what we call propaganda from the position of psychology. So we see that in the disciplines, we have each discipline, we have certain propaganda tools that actually exist within that discipline. So let's look at the 5 characteristics of what a propaganda is. Right? Propaganda propaganda is always in the eye of the beholder, i.e., the person who is doing the persuasion. All right, the other guy is using propaganda. So always, it's about you using the propaganda is actually describing the other party as using propaganda, but in fact, the one who is actually propagating is the one who is actually propagating. But they make references to the other party as using propaganda. All right. And then propaganda has a strong ideological slice. For example, Boko Haram or the ISIS. Now, every propaganda tool has an ideology inside it, all right? There's a belief system, a belief set that actually backs, the act of propaganda. Otherwise, you wouldn't actually propagate. But it's because you're propagating for a particular belief or a particular mindset. That's why you're actually doing what you're doing, trying to persuade people onto your side. Right? Propaganda relies on mass persuasion, so propaganda is institutional in nature. Yeah, because it's an ideological threat, it's almost, always institutionalized. It is practiced by organized groups as government, corporations, social movement, special interest, etc., because it has an ideological base. And that ideological base is always, within a certain group of people. And that's why we say that propaganda is institutionalized in nature. And it relies on mass persuasion. Of course, the mass media is what we use to drive, propaganda, for example. And it tends to rely on ethical suspect methods of influence. So deception, distortion, misrepresentation, or suppression of information are what we use to drive propaganda, isn't it? Every propaganda has these elements in them. Either we are telling half stories, or we are misrepresenting the story, or we are deceiving people, or we are suppressing an information. So as up to date, you would not, as we said, be able to find a balanced reporting of LGBTQ because we do not want people to know the other side, of course, right? So we say that in every propaganda, some of these tools will be in. It's either deception, distortion, misrepresentation, or suppression of information. Any question or contribution? All right, so these are the tools.
It's okay.
It's okay. All right, okay. So these are the tools the typologies of propaganda. We have what we call the plain folks appeal, testimonials, bandwagon, card stacking, transfer, glittering generalities, name calling, ad hominem, either or fallacy, red herring, faulty reasoning, and fears. I'm sure you have actually come across these typologies of propaganda in other subjects, all right? Have you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You can actually read about them and then be abreast with them, all right? Okay, so we'll close from here. It's almost 10 o'clock. We'll close today and then we'll continue maybe after Saturday. Julius, you have me on the Saturday program, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. Any questions or contribution? All right, guys. Thank you. What's plain folks appeal? Gifty is asking what's plain folks appeal. Who can explain to them? Plain folks appeal.
Say.
Yeah. Fifi.
With the plain folk appeal,
yeah.
The political actor comes to the people, he shows himself like as they are.
Yeah.
He becomes like the ordinary citizen.
That's right.
Yeah. So like the minister who was preparing Bankun for
that's right.
The electorate to win their votes, yes.
Yeah, so you come across as though you are like them. Yeah. Yeah. All right, thank you. Okay, guys. So let's speak another time. All right. Have a good day. Good weekend, right? Or you have other.
All right, Doc. Thank you.
All right. See you, Sam.
Right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah.